So we're gonna make kind of really modern, interesting textural piece for our plated dessert. So in my pot, I have passion fruit juice and sugar, and I'm gonna bring that up to a boil. And I'm gonna gently stir it because I don't want to get all this granulated sugar dissolved, but I'm not gonna stir it like crazy because I want all my sugar to melt and I want it to stay melted as it cooks. But what can happen with sugar is that as let me say this. Sugar wants to be crystallized, like it wants to be in that crystal form. So if I melt all the sugar and then I cook it down and then a sugar crystal falls back in, it can cause like this chain reaction of all of them turning back, all of the sugar turning back into crystals, which is called crystallization, which is not what I want. So I don't want to stir it like really vigorously because I'll slap up all the sugar crystals up on the side of the pot. And then when it comes to a boil and everything looks like it's dissolved, which is where I'm at right now, I'm going to take this spatula out and I'm never going to use it again. Well, I'll wash it and use it for something else, but it may still have sugar crystals on it, so I'm not going to use it again later because it could reintroduce my sugar crystals. So then I'm going to take some cold water and a clean pastry brush and just paint the sides of the pot in case I did push any little sugar crystals up so that they start to dissolve. Because once it starts to crystallize, once it starts to caramelize, it can go back to crystallized form. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let this boil, and what's going to happen is all that water is going to, the liquid from the passion fruit is going to evaporate, but the flavor is going to stay. And I'm going to let this go until I just start to see some color. So you can see just around the edge, I'm starting to see just a little bit of color, and the bubbles have gotten nice and slow. So that's my cue to take it off the heat just for a second. And I'm going to add my Rice Krispies. So hear that old crackle. And off the heat, I'm going to combine these until they're all evenly coated. And I can smell that like already kind of caramelized passion fruit. So it's going to have sweet notes from the sugar, bitter notes from the caramel, and then sour notes from the passion fruit. Remember, passion fruit is a really, really sour flavor. So once they're all coated, I'm actually going to put it back on the heat. And I'm going to cook it until it gets exactly as caramelized as I want it to. So it's going to, I could have taken the caramel just by itself and caramelize it. This is actually going to do two things. It's going to continue to cook the sugar, and it's actually going to toast the Rice Krispies a little bit. So you'll kind of get even more of a complex flavor. And this doesn't take long, and it's something you definitely want to continue to stir. Otherwise, it can get too dark too fast. The darker you get it, the more bitter it'll be. And this plated dessert, is on the sweeter side. It doesn't really have any bitter notes yet, so I do want to get some color on it. But if this was kind of a bitter dessert, like maybe it was cranberry or something like that, and a lot of bitter notes, I might want to keep this a little lighter. So we always think about that when we're putting together our desserts. We want to think about that flavor. All right, so I think that's probably, turn off my heat. That looks like about what I want. I'm just going to stir it a little bit off the heat to make sure it's all nice and even. And then I'm going to quickly spread it out on a parchment lined sheet pan. I want to spread it out so I can have kind of easily broken up pieces. I don't want like giant clumps because this is going to get hard and crispy. And if I don't spread it out and I leave it one big clump, it's going to be a lot harder for me to work with later. So I'm going to let this set up, and this doesn't take long, maybe It's actually really cold in here, so maybe like 10-15 minutes. If it was a hotter day, maybe a couple extra minutes, but it doesn't take long at all. And it's going to be really, really nice and crisp because the sugar, as it cools, is going to get like really, really hard, but it's just a thin coating, so it's just going to be a little bit of crisp. Addition to what already was a Rice Krispie. All right, so my main dessert is completely frozen, so I want to get it out of the mold. So all I have to do is turn it upside down and just press on it and pull back, and it'll pop up. And then we have this nice kind of cool shape, which is really unique, and it could be any shape, but these are, rounded. I'm just going to keep going for all of these until they're all popped out. Then I'm going to pop them back in the freezer until I'm ready for my next step. All right, so I'm going to start my mirror glaze, and I'm going to start that off with my powdered gelatin that I'm going to bloom in my smaller quantity of water. So I'm just going to sprinkle that on top. And then this is going to sit for about 5 minutes or so until it kind of becomes like a solid block and rehydrates all of my gelatin. Let that sit. I'll kind of want to make sure I get it all out of the bowl. You can already see that it's changed a lot. So it's going to sit for about 5 minutes. I've also already chopped up some white chocolate. You could also use chocolate chips. Mini chips are probably better because they just melt a little bit easier. And then in here I have my sweetened condensed milk, my water, and my sugar. So I'm going to let this bloom for about 5 minutes, and then I'll show you what's next. All right, so I have bloomed my gelatin. You can see that it's really firmed up. That gelatin is completely absorbed all the liquid. I turn it upside down, nothing comes out. So it's a good sign. It's been about 5 minutes or so. In the meantime, I've heated up my sweetened condensed milk and my water, my sugar. So this is the heat from this is gonna melt the gelatin. So I need to get hot enough to melt the gelatin, but I don't want it to get to boiling because if you get it to boiling, it can ruin how gelatin works. So it's like about 140 degrees. So I'm gonna add my bloomed gelatin into my cup. And honestly, a bowl would be better for this, but I ran out of microwavable bowls. So I'm just gonna measure it, do this straight into my cup. So make sure I get all that gelatin. That's going to be really important to this setting correctly. And I want to just stir that in, make sure that I got all of my gelatin dissolved. I shouldn't see any little clumps of gelatin because that's a terrible, terrible texture. Again, make sure you're really thorough to get all those chunks out. And to make sure you got all your gelatin. Super important to get it all. Okay, now I'm going to add my white chocolate, which I've melted in a microwave, just at 10-second little bursts. And after every 10 seconds in the microwave, I give it a quick stir. That way we avoid the white chocolate burning. White chocolate burns really, really easily, burns quicker than any other chocolate. So you really want to be careful when you're melting in the microwave. You never want to put it in for like a minute or two because it's going to burn. And once it's burnt, there's nothing you can do about it. I also don't want it to be screaming hot. So I usually take my chocolate out when it's like 80 to 90% melted and then just stir it with the residual heat because I'm actually going to need my mirror glaze to cool down before I can actually use it. So I don't want it to be screaming hot because it just takes longer for it to cool down. And I'm going to stir that completely in just to make sure I don't have any clumps of white chocolate or clumps of gelatin. It needs to be all completely combined because you'll see those little chunks over our Bavarian creams and it will not look pretty whatsoever. So. Again, take your time, and this would go a little faster in a bowl, but like I said, I ran out of the microwave-safe bowls. And once I'm happy with it, I'm going to strain it just in case there's a lump or two that I didn't see. Super important to get that out. And I do have like a little bit of white chocolate that didn't quite incorporate, so it's good that I'm straining it all out. You can see I just have a few little pieces. So now I can color it. And this is a pretty thin mirror glaze. I don't want it to be like crazy bright and vibrant. I'm looking just for a little bit of sheen with a little bit of color. And since I have passion fruit, I want that sheen to be a little bit yellow. But again, it's going to be very, very delicate. Not going to be a bright yellow. This is going to look really bright yellow when I'm done, but it's going to be such a thin coat that it won't really read particularly yellow. So I'm just going to keep going until I get the color exactly where I want it. White chocolate kind of has a creamish kind of tone, so I add a little bit of white color as well, just to make it a little bit more like of a pure yellow. And the color of passion fruit is yellow, but with a little bit of orange, so I'll probably add a little bit of orange color. Now I'm using gel colors for this. It's really important because you don't want to add a lot of liquid because it'll kind of change the consistency of your mirror glaze. And again, this is a thinner mirror glaze, so it's really important not to add any more liquid than I have to. So you just keep going until you get to a color you like, and I may keep adjusting this as it cools down, but I do want to get this to cool down, so I'm going to check its temperature. If it's too hot, it's going to melt our frozen Bavarian, and then you'll get a really ugly finish. But if it's too cold, it'll be really thick, and it'll go really, really lumpy. So it's really important I get the temperature right. So I'm looking for 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's going to make it cool enough that it won't melt my Bavarian instantly, but it'll be not too hot either. Again, and I don't want it to be really clumpy. If I get it too much cooler, it'll start to that gelatin and that white chocolate will thicken too quickly when it touches our frozen Bavarian. So I'm just going to stir it periodically until I get to the right temperature. Again, I might play with the colors a little bit more, but that's what I'm looking for. So my mirror glaze just temped at 90 degrees. I'm going to transfer it into something that's a little bit easier to pour and control. It's also got a little bit thicker, which is good. It'll coat a little bit better. And my domes are frozen solid, which is exactly what I want, because it's going to help the chocolate and the white chocolate and the gelatin start to set as soon as it hits, so it doesn't just like pour off. It kind of adheres. So I'm just going to start pouring it right on top, just like that. Make sure I go all the way around. I do have parchment on the underside of this, just to catch the extra mirror glaze, because I can actually very gently melt that and use it again. I want to make sure I'm looking to make sure I get good coverage. All the way around. As I go. And you can totally dye these a little more like kind of crazier colors, but for this dessert, I kind of wanted to keep it a little bit more mild in color. You've probably seen like the galaxy cakes and things like that. If I see that I missed, I will come back. You don't have like a ridiculous amount of time when you do these. So make sure your mise en place and focus, because you don't want your domes to start to thaw. You don't want your glaze to get too cold because it'll start to get gloopy. All right, so everything's nice and glazed, so it doesn't take long for this to set up because remember it's frozen. So once these are set up, which will only take a couple seconds, I can start to transfer them off of the rack. All right, now that these are glazed, and set for just a second, I can sometimes even kind of give them a tap to let that excess glaze kind of, whoops, not too hard of a tap. They don't fall over. And then I'm trying to wiggle my, over here, so I don't hit anybody. Wiggle my offset spatula underneath, and then I can pick it up and transfer it over. Like that. And this is when that cake really comes in handy because now this has been sitting out for a little bit. The very outside of the Bavarian is soft, so if I touched it, it would be really messy. But there's cake underneath. Cake's not messy. So if I see that there's still a couple little drips, I can take my offset spatula and just kind of wipe them off. Like that. So this mirror glaze is just giving it a little bit extra, a little shine, little. That one wants to run away. So I'm just going to transfer these over, and these can either go into the freezer if they're not going to be eaten soon, or they can go into the refrigerator to start to thaw for service. So just depending on what you need to do. But since they haven't thawed, they can actually go back in the freezer, which is nice because you can just have these. So you can make a big batch of these, have them in the freezer, and then pull out what you think you need for that tonight's service, and they're all ready to go. Okay, let's start with our plate up. So I've chosen a rectangle plate, which is really common in kind of modern plated desserts, kind of going away. In the meantime, I've also done one more element that I'm showing you right now, and that is a cake crouton. So I took that leftover coconut cake, and while it was frozen, I cut it into tiny little cubes, and I toasted it in a 350-degree oven, so it's kind of crunchy. So it's going to give another little unique flavor, but not really worth showing you how that works. But again, just frozen cake, because that's how I get those nice sharp lines. So really important to make sure that your plate is nice and clean before you start. It's really difficult to clean once you've got stuff on, so really important. So here is the lime curd that we made way back when. This is going to be a nice creamy but acidic element to our plate. So it's going to serve some of the plates I do kind of as a sauce, others just kind of as a small kind of hints of surprise. But I'm going to use my offset spatula, and I'm going to load some onto my spatula, and I'm going to do the a little bit of a swoosh on the plate. So again, I'm just going to load it carefully. And I want like a little bit of a curved line, so I want to think about what I'm doing before I do it. And you got to have some confidence. You don't want to really necessarily stop halfway. So I'm going to get some on my plate, all in like one spot, nice and neatly. And then I'm going to do my swoosh again. I don't want multiple movements. I just want one big movement. Just like that. And if I decide that's not enough, I can add a little bit more to get kind of a bigger swoosh. But again, I still want to stick with one big movement. I don't want little jaggedy lines throughout. So now I'm going to grab my main dessert where the mirror glaze is all nice and set, and I'm just going to set it with my offset spatula. Try not to touch it, because if any time you touch it, it's going to peel that little bit of glaze off. It's giving it a little bit more of a shine. It's a little hard to see in the camera, but definitely has a shine. But I don't want to peel that off. I don't want fingerprints at my dessert. It looks terrible.
And now I can add some extra components. So I'm going to kind of group the rest of my components on either side of the dessert. So I'm going to start with my crunch. So again, it's my caramelized Rice Krispies. So you can see when I break it how crisp it is. And that's going to give a really fun, playful texture to this dessert. And also some sweetness, some bitterness, and acidity. So I'm just going to break it into kind of smaller pieces. You don't want it to be massive. You want it to be kind of bite-sized. I'm going to go with some pieces on either side. And I have a lot of it, so I can be picky with which pieces I like and how I want them. So I'm just gently kind of pressing them into the curd and into the Bavarian so that they stick. I don't want to shove them in because it doesn't look very pretty. So next is my cake croutons. And sometimes it's kind of nice, especially in modern desserts, to tuck things in because then it's kind of like a little surprise. But again, just kind of grouping on either side of the dessert. And I'm going to add some color, but monotone desserts are also very trendy, so I don't have to add color to this dessert. It kind of got that monotone look, which is very, very trendy in modern plated desserts. So I could have left it that way, but I decided to add some color, especially because it's on camera. So to do that, I'm going to add some raspberry sauce. And honestly, this is not actual raspberry sauce because I already taught you raspberry sauce. So it wasn't worth making another batch. So I actually just took some raspberry jam and thinned it down just a little bit to show you what it would look like. And I put it in a piping bag, and now I'm just piping a couple little drops of the jam, but raspberry sauce would work exactly the same. And you can see I'm putting some dots on the plate, some on the cake croutons, again, just to kind of give it a little bit more intrigue. And that's a good trick, honestly, if you're in a bad place and you need a sauce real quick. Jams are a good thing for pastry chefs to have. I'm also going to add some fresh raspberries. So if you have really nice firm raspberries, you can actually kind of tear them, and the little, I don't really know what they're called, but the little round things will actually kind of separate really cleanly. And then you kind of get this really interesting rough look. Remember, and a lot of times with modern plate desserts, we're playing with like kind of natural textures. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. Instead of using whole raspberry that might look a little bit big and bulky, I can use kind of parts of a raspberry. Another thing you could do, which I haven't done, is because I don't have the equipment to do it, you can freeze raspberries like quickly in liquid nitrogen and break them, and each of those little seed pod things will break off, and that's a really pretty thing to use. But I'm just going to use kind of the ripped raspberries for this plate. And it does give a little bit of pop of color, gives a little bit more intrigue, which I kind of like, but definitely could have stick with the kind of monotone look as well. And modern desserts are all about being detail oriented, being really thoughtful about where you put stuff, not just kind of like clumping stuff, but really thoughtful about how you split it up.
So we talk about modern plated desserts. A lot of times we're talking about untraditional plates. So this is an untraditional plate. This is actually a tile, like from Lowe's or Home Depot. In fact, it's something left over from a project of mine. But it's kind of unique. It gives a little bit more texture. It's flat, which is kind of unexpected. And honestly, a tile is pretty tame compared to what some people are serving desserts on. I know when you look at modern desserts, you see anything from people plating directly on a table to stone or hay or wood. There's all kinds of crazy things. So feel free to get creative. Obviously, still remember it needs to be something that is food safe, entirely is food safe, because this tile wasn't actually used for anything else. So I'm going to go again first with my lime curd, but this time I'm going to use a paintbrush, which is another common technique to put sauce on. Definitely a modern way, but kind of getting older, actually, to be honest. And you could do this with any sauce. So literally, I'm just going to get some of this curd on my paintbrush, and I think I'm going to go the length of the plate, and I'm going to go a little off center for my design. And I might need to kind of start with some at the beginning. And since lime curd is a little thicker than like a traditional sauce, I might need to kind of add some not really have that little hump. Tease it back in and then brush over it. Feel a little bit better about that. And you can play around obviously with the color of your tile. Then I can go over to my main component now. And I think I will go right in the center of my line for this one. And remember, we want to play with negative space, so I'm going to leave this part empty. And remember, in the plate I just did, I have a bunch of empty space here. Remember, you always want to be thinking about empty space with modern desserts. So I'm going to come in with my raspberry sauce. And like I said, this is just raspberry jam, which is kind of a good thing to think about because sometimes we're in a pinch and we've got to do something. So we've got to get creative, and this is kind of a easy way to elevate a plate with something that I just already had. And then I think I'll go on with my cake croutons, and I'm just going to kind of, again, kind of keep going along the line that I've created. So remember, we're all about lines in modern desserts. That would be good. And then I can come in with my puffed rice. I might, because there's kind of more going on, I might want a little bit smaller pieces. Yeah, you can see I'm getting a little picky. Might add a couple more dots in here. Then I can come in with my raspberries. What I did with this one is I cut the bottom off, so it kind of gives me that cut look. Kind of gives me like a circle, which kind of plays off of the fact that I've already gotten a circle here. But because I've cut into it, instead of it being whole, means one that it's smaller, so it looks a little bit more appropriate for the size of the dessert. But also it kind of looks juicier. And I would definitely not want to waste the rest of that raspberry. I could turn that into sauce or puree or anything like that. And again, you want to do this with really firm raspberries, not overripe raspberries. All right, so that is plate up number 2. Okay, so in this one, I'm actually going to use a bowl, which a lot of people don't really think about bowls for plated desserts, but they're starting to be really, really common. Again, just something a little bit different, a little bit more interesting for the diner. I'm going to go back to my kind of I think I know what I want to do. I'm going to go first with my dessert. I'm gonna put it just off center. Again, it's going to help me create some negative space. And then I'm going to go in with my raspberry jam, and I'm going to create some little dots. But I'm going to kind of visualize a line. As I go. I'm actually going to go up on the rim. Now, old school plating techniques will tell you don't ever put anything on the rim. But modern techniques say it's okay. And the old technique, old reason is because, well, the server's got to touch something, right? But more modern designs are going to be at really, really nice restaurants where you're paying your waitstaff a lot of money, and they will be happy to work around it. Now, I wouldn't put it all over the whole design. They still need somewhere to hold on to when they pick up the plate. Just kind of a difference in opinion. So I've kind of created, I think, I'm going to bow this line out. I think that looks a little cool. Yeah, I kind of like that. So now I can go in with the rest of my accoutrements. So I'm going to do some of my cake croutons in here. I think I'm actually going to put my curd in a piping bag as well. And this could be in a squeeze bottle. That would be totally fine, but just because I'm only doing one dessert, it's not really worth cleaning a squeeze bottle over. And it's definitely not worth wasting a plastic pastry bag. They're very expensive. I'm going to put some lemon curd in here. So it'll almost be kind of like a little surprise. We all like surprises, right? We've got some cool flavors going on here. We've got some really sweet with the coconut. We've got some sour with the passion fruit and the lime. We've kind of got a mixture of sweet and sour with our Rice Crispies. So we've kind of got a lot of different flavors, and again, a lot of different textures going on here. Which makes for a really unique experience for our guests. And then I can get some raspberry. I might actually leave these whole because I have some tiny ones in here. Look how tiny, so cute. Maybe I have one more tiny one. I like odd numbers when I can. Our eyes just really like odd numbers. Don't know the science behind it, but I do know it's true. Right there. All right. Here is plate number 3.